prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
Welcome back to the Just Win podcast. We have the great Peter King joining us today. We're going to talk some Raider hires and a little bit about the draft. Peter, how you doing? How are you enjoying retirement?
Life is pretty good. I'm sitting here in Brooklyn. Going to walk my dog in a little while. It's 21 degrees. It's probably a little nicer where you guys are, but I have zero complaints. I get to sleep on Sunday nights, and life is pretty good. So it's good to be with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and sharing some wisdom with us.
Yeah, I guess I'll start off with, obviously the big news is that Pete Carroll is back. Did you always think he'd be back in the NFL after he left Seattle? And why is this a big move for the Raiders to bring in Pete Carroll?
I really didn't think he would be back, Vic. But the thing is, when you have a president who's 78 or whatever Donald Trump is, and an outgoing president who was, 80, 81, whatever, I guess that gives you a different view of aging. A generation ago, when you turned 65 or so, it was over. You didn't have an opportunity to keep going. But now, obviously, Pete is going to be 74 years old. He's 74 going on 14. And, obviously he seems to have a lot more energy than the traditional 70-something guy does. And he's going to need it with that franchise.
And with Pete, I know you obviously covered the NFL for a long time, a lot of his run, when he's with the Seahawks. What do you think made him so successful with the Seahawks? And I know that the Raiders are a completely different franchise, but how do you think he could do, going into this year with the Raiders?
Well, Tashan, what I always thought was interesting about Pete is that he had a way of getting to the Marshawn Lynches, and he had a way of getting to everybody on his team. And I do think that it got old in Seattle. And, there's an old saying in coaching that, and Bill Cowher said this when he left the Steelers, that, after 10 years, you really ought to think about, your expiration date coming around. Now, that's changed a little bit because of free agency, but I do think that there are some guys anyway in Seattle who got a little bit tired of the Pete shtick, and that's one of the reasons why he and the team parted ways. But I think one of the things that he does and does very well is that he convinces the 53 guys in the locker room that if you're good, you're going to play. I don't care if you're a free agent from, Stony Brook, undrafted. If you're good, you're going to play. And I think he did that. He proved to his team. Now, people may not remember this, and it may not be the greatest example, but in 2012, they draft Russell Wilson in the third round, 78th pick or something like that. And they had given money that offseason to a free agent quarterback named Matt Flynn. And everybody thought that Matt Flynn was going to get the first shot. And by the middle of August, it was apparent around Seahawks training camp, oh my God, they're going to start this kid. And that's because Pete Carroll means it when he says, if you're the best guy, you're playing. So I think that's one thing he'll be able to get across to this team. And look, I don't think anybody thinks he's going to last 10 years because he's not. But he's a good guy right now to get this franchise back on its feet. And look, as you guys know, this far better than I did. it's highly apparent that Pete was not the first choice. That Tom Brady really wanted Ben Johnson, and he tried to get Ben Johnson. And look, I have not talked to Brady in a while, and so I have no idea what exactly happened. But if you're Ben Johnson, even though you say, man, it'd be cool to work with Tom Brady, the greatest of all time, you probably look at it and say, it'd be cool to work with Brady, only he's not playing quarterback. He's just advising us quarterbacks. And so obviously for him to go to Chicago, I'm sure was a blow to some people in Vegas. But I do think that the Raiders will really be able to hit the ground running as well as they could with just about any coach with Pete Carroll.
And, in addition to Pete Carroll, the Raiders hired John Spytek as their GM, a longtime executive with the Tampa Bay Bucks. I'm not sure how familiar you are with him from his time there, but, he obviously helped them win the Super Bowl with Tom Brady back when he signed with them as a free agent. Has been pretty well respected across the league. Did you have any sort of reaction to that hire or imagination about how
I never dealt with John Spytek, so I was pretty close to Jason Light, the GM of the Bucks. And I knew a couple other guys there, but I didn't know John Spytek. I might have met him, but I certainly never had any dealings with him. But obviously, he's comfort food for Tom Brady, and we'll see how it goes. And look, everybody who knows Spytek thinks that he's really bright, extremely competent, and will be a really good, it's just like when Pete was in Seattle having John Schneider. I'm not sure they're best friends now after the sort of divorce in Seattle, but John Schneider is one of the best general managers in the league. And I think Spytek's got a lot of tendencies and a lot of characteristics of a John Schneider. Basically knows the game exceedingly well, has worked with really good people, just like when John Schneider worked with Ron Wolf. So I think it's a logical choice. And look, I'll just say this, guys. To me, the Raiders have got to get off the merry-go-round. They just do. They've had 1,000 coaches and 500 GMs since Mark Davis took over this team, 14 years ago, 13 years ago. And that's one of the reasons they've only had 2 winning seasons since he took over. This franchise has been an abject disaster. And what has to happen right now, honestly, is that, Mark Davis has got to get out of the way. He just does. And I'm not saying that he, in Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, I was in the draft room, whatever year it was, 22, I guess, or 23. I forget what year it was. But you could tell that although Mark Davis is highly interested, he's not putting his fingers in the pie all the time. And so I'm not saying that he's the one who has brought them down. But the fact is, he has the itchiest trigger finger or one of the itchiest trigger fingers of any owner in recent NFL history. You've got to hire people, step aside, and let them do the job, period. And Mark Davis just hasn't been able to do that. Can Tom Brady convince him to do that? And will he stick by whatever word he's made to Brady and to Carroll and to Spytek? We'll see.
What are your thoughts on Chip Kelly coming back to the NFL? What were some of the thoughts around him when he flamed out of the league? And have you heard anything about what people are thinking about him coming back into the league?
Chip Kelly, to me, I think Chip Kelly is an incredibly bright person. He just had some communication problems and some difficulty in dealing with veteran players in the NFL. I know that when look, and it's easy to say now, but Chip Kelly basically put Howie Roseman out to pasture 12 years ago with the Eagles. And Jeff Lurie at the time refused to fire him because he thought that Howie Roseman was really a bright guy and he wasn't going to get rid of him. So they basically stripped him of all authority. And Howie kind of used this a couple of years, 3 years of continuing education of how to be a better NFL general manager when he got his next chance. I don't know that he knew at the time that his next chance would be right where he was, sitting there in exile in some back office in Philadelphia. But, and again, look, I wasn't there. Nobody knows what happened. But the fact that Chip Kelly, basically farmed out a guy who now is a top 3 or 4 general manager, and certainly the hottest general manager in the NFL, that would be concerning to me. How do you not get along with a guy like that? So I think Chip, then he had his terrible year in San Francisco where I think they really couldn't wait to get rid of him. And so, look, I think Chip Kelly's got a lot to prove. He came in as a wonder boy in Philadelphia, and it worked the first year or so. I wrote about him a lot and how smart he was, and he is. He's really, really smart. But, I mean, I've heard, all these different quarterbacks, hey, maybe they'll get this guy, maybe they'll get that guy, maybe they get, Aaron Rodgers, maybe they get Sam Darnold. I have no idea what they're going to do. I don't do this anymore. You guys would know. But all I can say is this. He better get along with his quarterback, and he better get his quarterback to buy in. And, I think those are big. After the way it ended his last time in the NFL, those are the questions I would want to know. Again, incredibly smart guy about offense. I defer to him in all ways in that way. But, he left a trail behind him in 2 places that wasn't very positive.
You've seen this in your years of covering the league, but I guess there's some guys who are probably better suited to being number 2 guy than to being the number 1 guy. Maybe that's the case with Chip, maybe.
He might be. I mean, you look at Steve Spagnuolo, he certainly seems like a better number 2. You look at Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy, I mean, I don't want to overstate this, but Matt Nagy is an incredibly good idea man for Andy Reid. I can give you 10 examples. Really, really good. They work great together. Now, Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo both flamed out as head coaches. So maybe they are where they should be. I will also say that maybe they weren't very good as head coaches because they didn't have Patrick Mahomes. And they didn't have, a very good quarterback. And maybe Matt Nagy flamed out because I don't know who's coaching Mitchell Trubisky to be a great quarterback in the NFL. So, there's a lot of different reasons why things happen. But look, Chip Kelly did a really, really good job at Ohio State last year when, they seemed to get very inconsistent in and out play from their quarterback, but they still had enough to put a jillion points on the board late in the year and win the national title. So we'll see what happens.
And I know you mentioned earlier, but, since he's brought into the franchise last year, Tom Brady has had a ton of influence, whether it was in the hiring cycle. He's going to be involved when it comes to, their offseason personnel moves, whether it's free agency or the draft, sort of that high-level advisor role. And, he's not the first former player we've seen do this, whether it's John Elway in the past or in another sport, people like Jerry West and Michael Jordan as an owner. It's gone good and it's gone bad in certain situations. I guess, what do you think about Brady, assuming so much responsibility within the Raiders and how do you think he'll do in this new sort of role moving forward?
Well, honestly, Tashan, it's so hard to know because I don't think Tom Brady is like any of those guys who you mentioned. Because, well, I don't know about the NBA guys. I don't know anything about it. But John Elway was in the building every day grinding, just like a classic general manager. How much is Tom Brady there? How much will he be there? Is he going to be there twice a month? Is he going to be there 30 days a month? I just don't know. From what you hear, he is going to have a bi-coastal or whatever bi-city existence, whether it be, at his home in Miami with his kids. He's also got a beautiful, grandiose apartment in Lower Manhattan. I don't know. I don't know how much he's going to be doing, but again, I think the only way you can really judge how impactful he's going to be is by judging, at least starting to judge what they're going to do at the quarterback position. It's obvious. The Raiders are behind a big 8-ball right now. And they don't have their quarterback of the future, I don't think, on their roster. And they aren't in position in the draft unless one of these two guys slides or unless they trade a lot to move up to get either of the two really good quarterbacks. And I don't look again. I say really good quarterbacks. What do I know? I know what I see in headlines and everything, and these guys are probably going to be picked pretty high. But again, I don't know how good they're going to be. So I think what Mark Davis clearly wants from Tom Brady is he wants him to be a really good sounding board and a guy who's going to watch tape on all these guys. And look, there's no reason. Over and over again, guys, I think that we see over the years what happens when people fall in love with quarterbacks before the draft. And I'll never forget last year. I mean, I was out, but I'm listening to everything. Everybody is kind of tearing apart Bo Nix. And I remember Sean Payton. At one point, I was talking to Sean Payton about possibly doing something with the Broncos for NBC at the draft. It didn't work out, but I talked to him enough in the 3 weeks before the draft to know that Sean Payton had the biggest man crush in recent NFL history about Bo Nix. And the only other guy last year in the draft he would have taken ahead of Bo Nix is Caleb Williams. Now, look, I don't know what that says about him or whatever, but all I'm saying is that a lot of people were tearing apart Bo Nix. So the point I'm making is maybe Tom Brady looks at film and he goes, hey, listen, I think Jalen Milroe is better than both these guys. Let's just trade down in the first round, get some draft capital, and take Jalen Milroe in the 20s or whatever. So I don't know what will happen, but obviously, if you are the Raiders right now and you know that you have Tom Brady in your employment doing whatever, and I don't know what it is, the only thing I care about in the next 2 months is I want him to watch every snap of all of these quarterbacks' college careers. And I want to then find out, okay, Tom, who do you want? How much do you want them? And can these guys win in the NFL?
You mentioned the veteran quarterbacks. I want to ask you about some of those guys. I know a few months back, I think you wrote or said something somewhere about Aaron Rodgers. You thought he might go to the Steelers. Why'd you see that as a good fit back then?
I didn't think, Vic, I knew nothing. All I said was I think he should go to the Steelers.
Okay.
And the reason why I think he should go to the Steelers is last year, in the last couple of years, Aaron Rodgers was in a situation where Aaron Rodgers, dictated terms and conditions. Okay? How did that work out? Like horse crap. So Aaron Rodgers, if he plays again, needs to go somewhere like Pittsburgh, where Mike Tomlin says, hey, Aaron, here's the rules. You want to play by him? We're interested. If you don't, love you, have a good life. And then Mike Tomlin always, you hear these stories all the time, he has no problem calling a guy into the office and saying, hey, what is this crap you're pulling right now? So, that honestly is what Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career needs. He needs to go somewhere where all he does is play football and get coached and fit into what the team is doing. Now, everybody is going to say, well, he can't do that. Look, he's shown over and over again he can't do that. I hardly think the Pat McAfee show matters. I don't care about that at all. Let him do 5 Pat McAfee shows. Truly, I don't care. What I do care about is coming to work in the morning. If it was Pittsburgh, sitting in the quarterback room with I would hope they would re-sign Justin Fields, with Justin Fields, Arthur Smith, and whoever else, and doing what he is supposed to do as a quarterback. That is what I would hope he would do. Now, again, I have no idea. Aaron Rodgers really is an acquired taste, as you guys know. So will anybody want to take a chance on him, knowing that I'm not saying he can't do it anymore. I definitely think he can do it. I would much rather have Aaron Rodgers than Russell Wilson right now at this stage of their careers. But I would only want to have Aaron Rodgers if he was all in and he was checking his whatever at the door and just here to play football and not to dictate terms of employment.
I also want to ask you about Sam Darnold. There's a huge split on him as far as the NFL community goes. Where do you stand on the Sam Darnold debate, and do you think Raider fans should be excited about the chance maybe getting Sam Darnold?
Well, I'd rather have Sam Darnold than the people they have on the team right now. But I don't know how you could watch football closely at the end of this season and not think, at least in part, that you may have been watching fool's gold for 3 months with Sam Darnold. He was so awful, in the last 8 quarters of the year. And obviously he's getting chased and beat up a lot. I get that. But holy cow, did he make some bad decisions in the biggest moments of Minnesota's season. So I would be worried about him. I wouldn't pay him $40 million a year. I certainly wouldn't pay him $55 million a year. But I like him. I think I like him. Look, I'm a baseball fan. I don't like Alex, and I'm a Red Sox fan. I don't like Alex Bregman at $40 million a year at all. But I kind of like him at 3 years, $40 million a year, with an out after every year. That's the way I would feel about Sam Darnold. 2 years maybe with Sam, and asking Tom Brady, okay, let's not talk about your first or second, maybe or even third, the top 3 guys. Give us a second or third round pick who you like a lot and bring him in and put him in the mix and then just see what happens. And again, look, when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, whatever year it was, 2020, everybody thought that they were drafting Jalen Hurts, and it was a slap in the face to Carson Wentz. at the time, Howie Roseman told me we are not drafting this guy to chase Carson Wentz out of town. We just don't want to pay Nick Foles $10 million a year to be a backup quarterback. And so at the time, they wanted Jalen Hurts to be a backup. And then who knows what happens in the future. And what happened was Carson Wentz sulked, behaved like a child, and just didn't take that message, or he didn't receive the message well. And so he ended up being gone. It ended up, honestly, really almost basically killing his career. But right now, to me, I think the Raiders have to be very smart at the quarterback position and have to have multiple options right now at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and speaking about the quarterback position, you kind of talked about wanting Tom Brady to watch a lot of these prospects and giving his opinion. But, not every former quarterback becomes a good personnel guy. I think there's a special skill set. I don't know how much you've talked to Brady, but how much do you think his experience and his knowledge of the game translates into being a good personnel guy and being able to evaluate these guys?
That is such a fantastic question. That is the question for every Raiders fan. That if I were a Raiders fan, I would want to know. And, the reason why I say it in that way is that, I saw when the Dolphins said to Dan Marino, hey, Dan, lead us out of the wilderness. Find us a quarterback who's better than Jay Fiedler. And, it never happened. And I saw when Pat Bowlen handed the reins to John Elway and said essentially, hey, John, listen, we got to get a long-term quarterback. Figure it out, find one. And, I mean, he took Paxton Lynch in the first round. And so I think that is a logical question. And I would bet if you talk to Brady that he would, and again, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know. But if I were Brady, let me tell you a story about Brady. In his a couple of weeks after he was drafted, or 3-4 weeks after he was drafted, nobody knew who he was. The Patriots had a personnel guy who was Belichick's right-hand guy, Scott Pioli. And at the time, Patriots had kind of a crappy little small indoor facility, and Pioli was leaving the office one May night at about 9:00, and he noticed that the lights were on in this indoor facility. And not that he's trying to be the janitor, but he said, he was driving by. He said, I'm just going to stop, turn the lights off. And so he went in there and he looked, and there's Tom Brady throwing balls into nets, like 20 yards down the field. You know how quarterbacks do this. If they don't have a receiver to throw to, they're throwing the ball into these little holes in nets. And so Pioli walks in there, and Brady goes, oh, hi, Mr. Pioli. And he says, Tommy, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, just getting some throwing in. And, I think this is a Friday night. And Pioli made some comment about, come on, you can go home. It's all right. And, they talked for a minute, and Brady was sweating. He had obviously been there for a little while, worked out for a while. And Pioli said, okay, just, turn the lights off when you go. And Brady said to him, hey, don't tell anybody you saw me here, okay? And because Brady didn't want anybody to think he was doing this so like he was brown nosing, and that the coaches and personnel people would think, this guy is just trying to impress us. But Brady knew that he had a lot of catching up to do if he wanted to challenge for a job. He was one of 4 quarterbacks on the roster. And anyway, my only point is when I say Brady, I would bet, would want to meet these quarterbacks, because how can you really tell who has the ethos that you need your quarterback to have? You don't want the prima donna quarterback. And I don't mean to pick on Cam Newton, but I remember I was covering the draft in 2010, and I interviewed Cam about, I don't know, a month before the draft. And he said to me, hey, I don't just want to be a quarterback. I want to be an icon, and I want to be an entertainer. And I just thought to myself, and I wrote this, I said, NFL teams are not going to want to hear that. They want somebody who cares about one thing and one thing only. How am I going to get better in the next 2.5 hours of practice? That's it. And so, and again, I don't know what Brady's job is. I don't know what he's being asked to do or what he is saying, this is what I'm going to do. If I were the Raiders, I would want him to spend 45 minutes minimum with every one of these quarterbacks who he might take, including Sam Darnold, including Justin Fields, including Aaron Rodgers, even though obviously he knows Aaron Rodgers well. Whoever they're considering, I want Brady to look into his eyes and kind of to try to look into their souls and to try to find out who they are.
And there's a lot of things that the Raiders need to figure out this offseason. They have a lot of cap space. They do have a lot of draft capital. New regime, there's always going to be some differences. But they do have a couple pieces on the roster, and Max Crosby and Brock Bowers, who had a great rookie season. And they have a lot of resources that they could potentially use to flip the roster this offseason. Just kind of, from a 30,000 foot view, how do you feel about the Raiders' future moving forward, and what do you think it'll take for them or really anybody else to compete with the Chiefs in the AFC West?
They got to solve the quarterback, and they got to solve the quarterback right now. I mean, I don't mean in any way to criticize Dan Quinn. I think Dan Quinn is a good football coach. But late in this year, I was reading all these stories about here's what Dan Quinn did to turn around the Washington Commanders. What a pile of crap. You know what he did to turn around the Washington Commanders? They drafted Jaden Daniels. That's what they did to turn around the Commanders. So that's why, look, Pete Carroll could be, Thomas Edison and John Spytek can be some combination of Bobby Beathard and Ron Wolf. And these guys can all be the greatest guys in the world. And look, I like Gardner Minshew, heck of a guy. But if you're relying on Gardner Minshew to go 12-5 next year, this just in, that is not going to happen. So you got to solve the quarterback thing. And that's far and away the most important thing. Now, you might say, okay, we're not sure we can solve it. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Then make sure that you solve around the quarterback so that you have a chance if you play, your game at 95% efficiency, that you can win any game that you're in. And the Raiders have shown it. They beat the Chiefs last year, and they should have beat the Chiefs this year. And clearly they understand how to play the teams in their own division. So the whole issue is you start to get really, really good. They're the only team in this division right now. If you really look at this and really try to figure out who's got this division kind of figured out, they are not going to be ultimately competitive in this division until they can compete with Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and maybe you'll say there's a bit of a gap there, and then Bo Nix. But those three teams are 1,400 miles ahead of the Raiders at quarterback now. They all have their long-term answer at quarterback. So, and the point I made about you got to solve, if you're not sure you can solve the quarterback thing now, just make sure that this year, whether it's going out and spending legitimate money on Trey Smith, and really trying to make sure your offensive line is as good as possible, so that in 2026, when you bring your quarterback in, you've got an excellent infrastructure. So that's probably the way I would do it.
A strong finish, man. Thanks again, Pete, for taking time to talk to us. Your dog is waiting for his walk. We appreciate it, your patience. But again, thanks a lot.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot for having me. Take care.
Thanks, Pete.
Yes, sir.
All right. Again, thank you to Peter King for just giving us some background and some good background knowledge to some of the Raiders' new hires and what he thinks. We'll get into some fan questions now to end the pod. First question from Salo Padilla. What do you guys think of the scenario where they sign a bridge quarterback and also trade up to one to draft Cam Ward? In this scenario, Cam would sit for a year to develop.
I think that's fine. I'm not a huge Cam Ward guy. I mean, I think he's obviously one of the top 2 guys in this draft, but I don't know if I want to trade too much to get up there to get him. But I do think again, we'll see what Tom Brady's influence is, but I do think Tom in the past has said he likes to have quarterbacks kind of sit and learn. So I can definitely see a period of time where the new guy is kind of learning from a veteran guy. So yeah, I mean, it depends on the package what it would take. And again, I might be more leaning towards Shador than Cam Ward, but it's close. I do think they're the top 2 guys, so I wouldn't be opposed to it if the price was right.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that for Cam Ward, but I would for Shador Sanders, as long as it's nothing too crazy. But I did think either way, whether they draft somebody or not in the first round, I do think they need to come out of free agency or the trade market with some sort of stopgap option at quarterback. Assuming that they're going to move on from Gardner Minshew, even having Aiden O'Connell there, I just don't think that's enough that you can feel comfortable with rolling into 2025. And so whether it's a Justin Fields or Russell Wilson or, swinging a trade for somebody, I think they need to do that for sure going into the draft just to protect themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a guy like Cam Ward, Shador Sanders, they have a lot of playing experience. So I think for most teams, those guys wouldn't feel the need to sit those guys for a year. But maybe, like as Vic said, maybe Brady does believe that every quarterback could use a year to sit, which would be a different philosophy than what most teams have, especially when you have guys that you think could come in and contribute right away. And those guys have a ton of experience and they're a little bit older. And as far as trading up, I mean, it's going to be expensive. There's if you're going to make that trade to number 1, there is no deal that doesn't look crazy, and it isn't crazy. So you better be very sure that these guys are the guys. And as we've talked about a million times, there is no certified number 1 quarterback in this draft. You could talk about how Cam Ward and Shador Sanders are as maybe underrated as you want, but these guys are not getting drafted over Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels or Drake May. They're nowhere near that class as far as being a prospect. So if you're comfortable trading a haul to get to number 1 for that type of prospect, then you're probably seeing something that not everyone is seeing. But again, drafted quarterbacks and all this stuff is not exact science, and maybe you're right. But as far as just consensus opinion, it seems like a very expensive trade to get up to draft one of these guys number 1 overall. All right, second question. Who is the top quarterback you would target if Sanders and Wards are unavailable? Which player would you draft at round 1, pick 6 in that scenario as best player available from the White Wolf?
I mean, I definitely wouldn't be drafting a quarterback at 6 if I was sticking and picking. Just like you said, transition to best player available. And obviously that's going to depend on what happens ahead of them. But I don't think they can really go wrong with any of the consensus top 10 guys, whether it's Millen, the receiver out of Arizona, whether it's, I don't know if Travis Hunter somehow falls there, Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. Dual Carter, et cetera, et cetera. Like I think there's a lot of talented players, probably more so on the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball, that are expected to go in that top 10. But I think there's a range of positions they go with just because this team has so many needs. I mean, you could run down a list: offensive line, receiver, cornerback, defensive line, et cetera. So, I think they can go with that true best player available approach. And they might do that even if one of those quarterbacks is still on the board. Honestly, we don't know how they feel about them. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're in a good spot. I think you look at the different tiers of the draft class. I think definitely probably the top 6, 7 players might be that first tier. So there are some studs who you can't take the best player available and get a guy who can step in and start right away and have impact. Or you can trade down and get more picks if that's what you want to do. But I think like either one's is a solid approach for a team that's kind of building. As far as the quarterbacks go, I mean, Joe Murrow had some highs and lows in the past year, but I do think he has a high ceiling. It might take a while to get there, so maybe that's a guy you look at in round 2 as a guy. If he's going to sit a while and learn while you have a veteran guy in there, he might be an attractive target at that point. But clearly, there's going to be a lot of movement in those quarterbacks from 3 to 6, 3 to 7. I mean, the combines next week, and there's a lot of buzz about the Louisville guy and about the Ole Miss guy. So who knows? But I do think in terms of ceiling, I do like Murrow's ceiling, but I think it'll take a while to get there.
I mean, I think Chip Kelly would know best, but
Yeah.
Will Howard really improved towards the end of the year, in the playoffs especially. And when you just look at him from a traits perspective, he's 6'4", 6'5", 200 something pounds. He can run, and he's extremely accurate. I mean, those are very good traits to have. I mean, I think there's some questions to how he plays under pressure. There's some up and down play in that area. But Chip Kelly is a guy who's seen his development firsthand. So maybe that's a guy that he thinks is willing. He'd be willing to develop a little bit more and spend a little bit more time with. And he's a guy that might be, a 3rd round pick. So we'll see what happens with that. But again, when you just look at the traits with a guy like Will Howard, he has very desirable traits in a quarterback. And as far as best players available at 6, we know that Pete Carroll really values defensive linemen and cornerbacks. So at that spot, if Abdul Carter is there at 6, I mean, even with Tyree Wilson, and if you feel optimistic about him, I mean, if he's there at 6, you jump to the stadium, the podium, because he's one of the best prospects in this draft. I'd be surprised if he's there, but again, like you never know how things fall out in the top 6. Maybe depending on how they evaluate Graham, if they feel like he's a top tier defensive tackle prospect, then you could team him up with Christian Wilkins for the next 5 years or so. That'd be a great pick there too. I think Will Howard's a very realistic option at 6 if a quarterback isn't there, and we know Pete Carroll loves his cornerbacks. So yeah.
You mean Will Johnson?
Will Johnson. Yeah.
Say Will Howard.
Will Johnson. Sorry, I'm under the weather. If you hear my voice.
Yeah, I mean, if Sanders and Ward are gone, I probably would, like you guys said, wait till day 2 to try to address the quarterback position. Will Howard, I think, makes a lot of sense if he's there. With one of the picks they have in the 3rd round, I don't think I'd be mad at that. Just kind of taking a flyer on the guy.
All right. Next question from Casey. What players could be viewed as top trade candidates to bring to the Raiders?
It's kind of hard to say. I know we've had some notable guys request trades as of late, like Deebo Samuel and Myles Garrett with the Browns. I'm not sure if the Raiders would be in the mix for those guys, but quarterback-wise, I think probably the most intriguing player would be Matthew Stafford. He's been at sort of an impasse with the Rams with his contract situation. He's been looking for a new deal for over a year now, I believe, and our Jordan Rodriguez has been reporting that it's kind of still in the middle of which way it's going to go. But I think if Matthew Stafford becomes available, like he's getting up there, he's almost 40 or maybe a couple years away from 40, but toward the end of his career either way, so he's not necessarily a long-term solution, but I don't see any reason to believe he's not going to still be a pretty good quarterback for the next couple of years at least. So if he becomes available, I think that's probably the most enticing guy to try to go get.
Yeah, I think Stafford definitely is very tempting. I've always been a Deebo guy. I know I think he'd be kind of a fun fit with Chip Kelly in the offense, though. I saw him Super Bowl week. didn't look like he was in the best of shape, so that kind of was a little alarming. But I guess it's January. Who cares? But I think he'd be motivated. Obviously, Niners will move on from him. I think he obviously has a unique skill set. I think there's still some left in the tank. So it might be a fun fit. I'm not sure what the price tag is. It can't be very high. I imagine probably a 4th-round pick or a 5th-round pick. But I think I at least would listen and see what it would take. And I think Chip Kelly, like I said, it'd be a fun kind of piece to have in his offense.
Yeah, as a guy that really enjoyed watching Deebo Samuel for most of his career, and going to Niner camp and go to some Niner games this year, I sadly think that man is cooked. I think his career is over. His career is over. I mean, as far as his career is over. I mean, he can't separate. His number one skill is getting yards after the catch, but he can't break tackles anymore. And he's been dropping the ball. And it's not like the Niners were trying. They were trying to give him opportunities last year. They were forcing the ball. He couldn't capitalize in a very good offense. So I think, maybe if he puts in the work and he loses a little bit of weight, maybe he could be effective. But I don't think you're getting a star receiver anymore in Deebo Samuel. All right. Next question. Do you guys hate the idea of JMT at 6 as much as I do? I think that's the worst possible idea. That is the luxury piece. This Raiders team is nowhere near good enough to take so high, especially with how deep the draft is at running back, supposedly, from rookie quarterback season 413.
Yeah, maybe they'll take him if like John Gruden sneaks into the draft room or something. But yeah, I think that'd be pretty stupid. Maybe if you try to trade it back and take him later on in the 1st round, but I think it'd be a waste of resources at 6, given where the team stands overall. Like they said, this isn't a team that's a running back away from contending, like the Eagles last year with Saquon Barkley. Not anywhere close. So I just think there's so many other positions they could go to instead of running back. And it's a pretty deep running back class. They could get a guy 2nd, 3rd round, step in and start from day one.
Yeah, I do think he's special. I think he's a special running back. I know those guys tend to go higher than people think, but I agree. I think that'd be kind of a rash move. I think it's kind of been proven. Running backs can kind of just step in, and guys don't have to be the highest, tier. I think we saw last year. Sincere McCormick, a guy who would kind of carry on nowhere, and he played well. I think there's guys you can have fill in the running back who can get the job done. So I don't think there's a huge need to get a guy at 6. So again, even he's special, and he's like, a future Hall of Famer, if that's what he is. I still think for the Raiders at 6, it's not a great fit.
Yeah, just drafting a running back when you haven't been proven to be a good team or a team that's on track is just bad practice. I mean, it's very hard for a running back to overcome their circumstances. We've seen that with Josh Jacobs. He could be a leading rusher one year when there's some pieces around him, and he could be a guy that averages 3 yards per carry when he doesn't have the blocking. And I think one of the best examples we've seen is the Giants drafting Saquon Barkley. I mean, obviously Saquon Barkley, one of the best players in the league, and they drafted a really good player, but he was wasted. His good years were wasted with the Giants. I mean, he did the most he could, and then he left in free agency and became one of the best players in the league. And it's not like he got better or changed; just the circumstance changed. And they would have been better off drafting. I don't know who was available that year, but another quarterback, another piece for their offensive line or defensive line. So yeah, just drafting a running back that high, no matter how good they are as prospects, just not good practice. Last question.
I was going to kill the Giants for not bringing back Saquon, but if they brought him back, they pay him all the money. What, they won 6 games, 7 games? No, not correct. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like they had a huge, disparity where they would have been with him or without him. So I do think, like you said, it matters the fit and the team, where they're at, and they're, if they're ready to contend, and the Raiders are not quite there yet. So,
yeah. But I do think running backs are more valuable now, especially with how the game is trending toward running the ball again. But again, if you're not a good team, that's just not what you should be doing or pursuing. Last question from Jason. Are the Raiders better off with Pete Carroll / Chip Kelly combo rather than landing Ben Johnson?
I mean, we never really know with these first-time head coaches how it's going to go, right? Like Ben Johnson could be terrible at game management. interpersonal skills, et cetera, et cetera. Like, the Raiders know very well with Josh McDaniels, like being a great play caller doesn't mean you're going to be a great head coach. So I know people have questions about Pete Carroll. Is he over the hill or whatnot? But I think at least what the baseline is with Pete Carroll. Like, you're going to have a good football coach. Like, I don't know if you're going to be a Super Bowl winning team, but I think that'd be a question mark whoever the Raiders hired as head coach, given what his roster is. And so better, I guess it's kind of hard to say, but I think they have a lower or higher floor than they would have had if they hired Ben Johnson, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think talking about with Peter King, we talked about how, just because you're a great number 2 guy doesn't mean you can be number 1. And I think with Ben Johnson, we'll see. Is he going to be a guy who takes the league by storm again with his new team and his play calling, and Caleb Williams becomes one of the top guys in the league? Maybe, but I mean, it's really hard to predict that. So I think we'll know more, a year from now. But I think clearly Ben Johnson was, the first choice and didn't happen. So I think Pete Carroll is a nice, practical, and somewhat exciting, I think, for a team that's had no stability to have a guy like Pete Carroll. So I think right now I'll say it's a push, but I definitely could see where, in hindsight, a year from now, that Pete Carroll was the better option for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think, with guys that haven't been head coaches is always a gamble. And with Pete Carroll, there's a baseline there. And I think at first I was a little pessimistic about the Chip Kelly hire, just based on what I've seen, what he did with Philadelphia and the Niners and how he kind of flamed out in the league. And Tashan wrote about that, about his offense in Philadelphia and San Francisco and how he kind of transitioned at Ohio State and has evolved. And just talking with Ohio State guys and guys that have worked with them about how much he has evolved since and how much he's learned since his time in the league, and watching his offense now is a lot more pro style and it's a lot more designery. And I think when he first entered the league, he relied a lot on tempo and simplicity, and it kind of took the league by storm because they just weren't ready for it. And but some of the better teams that were ready for the tempo, they were able to shut his offense down, and they knew what was coming. But now everything is a lot more pro style. He's switching personnel, he's using different formations, using motions, he's setting up plays and things like that. So I'm a lot more optimistic about Chip Kelly now as a strategist. As Peter talked about, there were some issues with communication and just kind of his personality. But hopefully as a number 2, those things aren't as big of a deal. But as a strategist and as a play caller, I'm very optimistic about Chip Kelly. But it's always a gamble when a guy goes from college to NFL, even if he has NFL experience. So we'll see how it works out. But I'm definitely a lot more optimistic about the Chip Kelly hire now than I was when it was first announced. All right, that's all we have for you guys today. Again, thank you to Peter King for joining us and giving some of his time now that he's retired. That's a big deal. So yeah, thank you to him, and we'll talk to you guys soon. We are all headed to Indianapolis this weekend. I know Tashan is super excited about that. So yeah, I'm under the weather. I just came back from Japan, so I'm trying to recover and get in a state where I can't stay up till 2 a.m. every day there. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys probably after the combine, and maybe we'll learn a little bit more about the Raiders, the prospects, and their plans.
Some research. Ain't y'all? There you go. Adios.
Bye, guys.